So, Susan Taylor is part of the team at Just Money Advisors, Inc., a Louisville, Kentucky financial planning firm which specializes in socially responsible and community based investing. There, she writes about money and money related issues, and we all have some, and as it relates to spirituality. She has led workshops for parents, and also she works with children and high school students. She believes in the vital role of economic justice as a means of creating and sustaining peace. She's highly officially qualified as a graduate of Western Kentucky University and the University of Maryland. Her key question is, how will this affect people? What would our worlds look like if we asked this question more? She is indeed committed to people. She and her husband work together at Just Money Advisors, and she's also a mom of 2 children, who are also people. She's a public school supporter, a pianist, and an animal lover. So she loves humans and all species. So let us welcome her to the stage.
I've never been on a talk show before.
So the way this will work is the two of us will have a conversation for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open up the floor for some questions, because if you are like me, you probably have some questions about money as it relates to your faith, unless everyone in here is an expert. I know I'm not. So welcome.
Thank you.
So let's pull up these questions. All right. So your first question. So as we talked earlier, and we found out that she was just in my hometown of Brooklyn last week. So we have a little bit something in common. I'm 27 and a recent seminary graduate, and I am up to my neck in debt. Studies show that my peers carry astronomical, nearly unrepayable debt, mostly due to student debt, although there is some consumer debt as well. We also know that younger women face very different economic prospects from our parents and grandparents. That would include downward slide in wages, huge increases in the cost of living, greater instability in the job market. Very few people today now have the same job for most of their lives, and et cetera. So UMW wants this study to be relevant for young adults like myself. What ways or what advice would you give to young adults who are looking to get above the drowning, overwhelming debt that is preying upon our lives?
I'm so glad she started with an easy question. Yeah. I have a 23-year-old and a 21-year-old. And yes, I know I'm too old to have children that age, but that's the way it worked out. There are kind of 2 ways to go at that. One is the more practical, just oh my gosh, how do I get out of the debt? Which frankly is just a harder question and very person-specific. It's one of those areas that we need to be working on systemic change for changing the way we finance college and our expectations for college. One of the reasons I've worked with children and parents is if we can help young people start asking some of these questions, values-related questions about their money earlier, then the hope is that the kids will be less likely to find themselves in some of the money traps that we participate in ourselves. Like I have extreme concerns for a couple of the beautiful young people at my church who have gone to their dream school. It's a lovely dream, and they're having a great time, and oh my gosh, they're going to have so much debt. And I didn't know how to step into that. It wasn't my job. It wasn't my role. But as parents, how do we help with that? One of the questions around that is, from a values base, from a faith base, is to make sure our kids know that their value does not hang on where they go to school, status, what kind of job trajectory you're on. My daughter just hides from adults because she doesn't want to answer any of those questions about, so what's next after college? And, because she feels like she can just hear them calculating, well, how much money are you making? And she just hides from adults. And I think we need to do a better job as the older people of just not asking. And I know we're interested, but to make sure that we're not creating that kind of stress, and to know our value is on more than our value to God and to each other is totally unattached to those financial related questions. Young people have an advantage in starting early, thinking about some of this, again, before you've, hopefully, when you still have time to make some decisions. And then my only other real, I guess if I had any advice, it would just be cling to the community. Because it's always been true that we manage better with others. And I think it will be even more imperative for your generation moving into some of these harder economic cycles, that our strength and the resilience will come from the collective and from being able to lean on the community. Does that help at all?
Yes, it does, and I feel so much better. I really do. It's nice to know there is someone advocating for, a tender way of responding to the college students who return home. Like, it's important to know that, the first question is, so what are you going to do with that degree? Because sometimes people don't know that yet. So thank you for that.
And it's not a reflection on how smart you are or how hard you've worked or anything else. It is a horrible job market that young people are walking into. And it can't be a reflection on them or their education or how hard they're trying if they're not immediately following some kind of professional trajectory that looks professional or whatever to us.
And you talk a little bit about, managing the ways that we talk to young people about value and self-worth, which I think is so much aligned with our call as people of faith. So let's imagine that we are at a church, and we're not going to ask the young people what they plan to do with that degree. You talk about money conversations in church and how they must move beyond giving if we are to address the role of money in our lives. So what's the best way to get a conversation like this going at a local church? And what are some of the key points that a congregation really needs to wrestle with in order to have this conversation with integrity?
Well, y'all are already doing it, taking these steps to move the study into the church. I think a lot of it depends on the particular church. In the work that Andy, my husband, and I have done in churches, we look for points of connection for the commitments that people in that church are already engaged in. So if it's a church that has loved Bible study, then maybe that's the place to start the conversation in a Bible study and around faith and money. If it's mission work or a connection to a local project, then maybe then that's the place to start the conversation, to start looking for what are the larger money issues from a grounding of faith that have created the situation that that this mission project is working to alleviate. Or if a sister church in another country or something that we can start the conversation with that solidarity piece of how we relate to money and how dealing with our own relationship with money from a grounding of faith can help us see through different eyes, to try to connect more closely with the people in that sister church. So I think it really depends on what people in the church care about and where they engage.
Mm-hmm. So a way of meeting people where they are in order to get some genuine reaction.
And to call out the wisdom that people already have, the experience that people already have. It's just so much easier to make that link. When I was in graduate school doing my economics degree, trying to teach economics to 18-year-olds is just... And it's not because they're dumb, they're not. They're smart and they try, but they don't know what an interest rate means. They've never made a mortgage payment. There's just nothing to hang it on. Now you get into an adult ed class and interest rates matter. It's just a completely different teaching experience. And so I think in our churches it's the same, as where do people have experience to start to see. And then once we kind of shift our brains a little bit to look at money from a faith perspective instead of the more cultural perspective, then we can, it's so much easier to apply to other areas and other ideas.
So earlier you mentioned that we really need to challenge our values about worth and dignity, and that it is really affirming, truly, to hear someone say that we are more than our degrees, we're more than, the titles before or after our name, especially living in a country like ours. There's so much competition, and it's so important for us to, keep climbing and keep climbing. And so I'm grateful that you're bringing up this question about values. And so we at United Methodist Women, we know that challenging economic inequality is necessary, and it requires all kinds of angles into the problem. We need protests, we need legislative action, we need education. And so UMW is working on increasing minimum wage and showing solidarity with low-wage women workers. So in your own opinion, in your own expertise, do you have any additional ideas about ways that groups like UMW can get involved with wage equality?
It's almost endless because there's so much good work going on now. There are people really struggling against, and I don't mean struggling like, oh, poor us, but really putting some energy into pushing back against the tide that continues to increase the gap. And it's unimaginable. I've looked at labor wage inequality when I was in grad school 30 years ago, and we thought that the wage inequality, the gap, was enormous then, and it's exponentially bigger now. So there's, like you said, there are just so many fronts, and just pick a spot and jump in. Is it local? Are the local enterprises the things that that energize and engage you? Is it at the state level or national level or global? There are places everywhere. In Kentucky right now, we've got and I'm sure I'm using this just as an example because there are examples in every state. Poor People's Campaign is actively engaged in 30 states now. Not quite sure where it's going. It's still kind of new, but they're people of faith and conscience who are working on a range of issues around inequality. From the high, for the high tax bracket folks, there's actually millionaires for higher taxes. I think that's not quite the right name, but have you heard about the people actually advocating to have their own taxes raised because they see the consequences of the perpetual growth in the social, environmental consequences of the increase in inequality. Millionaires for higher taxes or something else. And everything in between. In Louisville, we have a community organizing group that is hey, Steve. That's so nice to look up and see a beloved face. Local community organizing group that collectively decides what's our issue. What is of most concern to our communities, and it's a coalition of like 20 churches across denominations from all over the city that engage local officials. The national legislative efforts. At our state level, it's one of the big ones recently has been the utility companies are trying to pass legislation that basically make it financially infeasible for people to put solar panels on their house. It's a straight up money grab for the utility companies. And when you live in a state where mountaintop removal is stripping the mountains of eastern Kentucky, this really matters to people, to be able to dump all that sediment in people's water systems. And so that's another, that just almost anywhere, whatever issue, as Mike Little's the director of Faith and Money Network, where I've done a lot of my work and spiritual growth around some of this. And Mike always says, what breaks your heart? Mm-hmm. What do you see that touches you, that can provide, because all that the advocacy work, the justice work is so difficult and so slow and so ungratifying. Doesn't it just make you want to jump right in? And and it has to be something. It has to be at a point that really touches our hearts, or I don't think we can find the energy to keep going when the change is so slow. Again, though, it's about the community, because that's where you get the energy and the stick to it, is who are you working beside? Who's with you?
Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's give her a round of applause. Truly, when Mary asked me to do this, I was excited because she said I would be a talk show host, and I love doing that. So, but I'm glad that
She's a natural, don't you think?
But I'm truly glad that I'm in the room to hear you talk about this, because money is something that brings people so much anxiety, and so much of our health is really affected by, how we're going to pay our rent and how we're going to pay those bills, and making sure that everyone has something to eat. And so I'm personally very glad to have been in the room to hear you share some of your comments, especially as a person of faith. We ought not segregate these two matters because they're so intricately woven. So thank you. So we can take a few questions, and Mary will tell us when to stop. But I'm sure there are so many questions in the audience about anything that Susan has said, or maybe you've got your own kind of thing that you're chewing on that you'd like to offer to the room.
First of all, I wanted to thank you for your beautiful work, for your beautiful book.
Thank you.
It's very easy to read. I've spoken with some of the other teachers, and we're really excited about teaching it. I wanted to know from you, when you began to write, what was on your mind? As preachers, a lot of us are preachers. When we sit down to write, there's a word or a thought. What was on your mind when you sat down to write this piece?
Oh, help.
No. Well, that's on my mind a lot of Sundays too.
No, Well, I was talking about it a little bit earlier this afternoon. One of the key words for me in this work is enough. It's hard spiritual work to discern what's enough. One of my mantras, I have enough, I do enough, I am enough. And in a culture that tells us there's never enough wealth, never enough stuff, never enough experiences, vacations and, awards, and, it's just never enough. And I think people are tired. We can't do all that. And the older I get, the tireder I get. I can't, it's that, just from what you were saying earlier about the competitiveness and the climbing and it's that same spiritual issue of what is enough. And my value cannot be on how many cool pictures I can post to Facebook. It just can't be that.
Amen.
And I'm not sure God's looking at my Facebook page, a whole lot more interested in my life and what I'm doing for other people. So that's one of the words that has been formative for me in thinking about a lot of this work.
Hi.
Oh, sorry, the light's glaring just a little bit
here,
right there.
I
No,
can
that's
move
okay. I've got you.
I really enjoyed reading your book, too. My
thank
first
you.
response was to bury my head under the covers. And then my second response is I was just angry, and I really want to do something. And so thank you for the transformational experience of putting that work together. Incredible. So thank you. My question is, as far as the United Methodist Women, being up against some of these other forces that have created this mess is huge. And United Methodists, globally, nationally, and United Methodist Women, we're still no match for some of those forces.
Right.
So who would you suggest, what other groups are doing social justice advocacy work that may make a good fit for United Methodists, United Methodist Women to align with nationally, globally? Have you seen any other groups that we could pair with or align with or group together our energy with?
I wish I could say that there's one. When I am hanging out with social justice advocates and activists, and we all have our own groups. We're all chasing the same money I suspect it happens it happens in the church, right? There's a church on every street corner. What if we pooled our resources? I don't know. We might have to learn to get along. So I wish I could point to one and say, yes, there are many. So what's a fit for your local group? The one thing I would say is that people of privilege have had to be the ones who speak. Here I am up front, so I should not say that, should I? But there are people who are affected in very different ways on some of these money issues than I personally am. And their voices need to be front and center. And as a white person of privilege needs to be a supporter. I need to write the checks, show up if they tell me to, and otherwise shut up, except within my own community, within my own sphere of influence. So that's one piece I take very seriously when we talk about partnerships or working with other groups, is to be very clear about the power dynamics and where we fit in that. Uh-oh.
Yeah, I was wondering if you would just speak to some of the practical, real-life implications of being in community, and what does that look like as we seek to transform these environments in our relationship with money, but also how we work collectively, both to deal with our own stuff, but then also to push back against the systems.
We sometimes think in such all or nothing terms, and we think, well, if I don't join the commune and throw in all my money, and then I just can't do anything. It's kind of an all or nothing approach. I'm much more of an incrementalist than that. It made me a really good economist because you can see all different sides of the coin, and incremental change. But most of us are not going there. I'm not going there. But that I refuse to let that make me completely helpless. That there are some ways that I can be in relationship with others around these issues. And we actually, one of the reasons we live in Louisville is to be part of the church community that we're part of. It was an intentional choice to go there when we were moving for other reasons, to be part of that church community where we knew that they were going to be asking some of the same questions. It's been a great place to parent. I talked about this earlier the afternoon because all my kids' friends were being raised the same way, or in very similar ways. Nobody was throwing big, lavish birthday parties, and nobody got a car on their 16th birthday. And they were doing the same kinds of things and helping their kids make the same kinds of money decisions that I wanted to help with my kids. So even when I didn't have the energy to pull something off at some point, they're still seeing models in their everyday life of where they're playing and who they're studying with. And then we've done some collective action in our church around money. Contributing, I don't know whether probably don't have time to go into that whole story, but we've even been exploring what does it mean to, what might a 21st century common purse look like? If we're not all throwing our money in the center and then taking out what you need, because we're not going that far, but what might it look like? So I'll try to do a brief version. We've invested together in some community investment notes. It's loans through a 40-year-old nonprofit that makes loans, takes our money and lends it to groups doing affordable housing, small business development, job creation, living wage work, overseas microfinance, the kinds of things that we felt like were justice work in the economic realm that we don't have the capacity to do as individuals in a very big way, because nobody's got that much money. But as I was telling the group earlier this afternoon, we have like 50 people at our church and who give our total annual contributions as the church community is about $70,000 a year. So we're not talking big money. But collectively, we started looking at what money could we lend. Some extra money I've got sitting in a savings account or checking account getting 0.0 what interest and or a savings account or something. If I can get it back when I need it, that frees up different pools of money. We ended up with $180,000 in community investment notes, proactively at work in the world. People were horrified to realize that we had that much money sitting around and embarrassed, and nobody wanted to look at it. But most of that money has not been taken out, and it's been over a decade. It's been creating jobs and building affordable housing in the U.S. and overseas for over a decade. And people haven't even missed it. A lot of people probably don't even remember they've got money there. Fortunately, we've kept good records, so. But that's the kind of thing we've experimented with as a community. And all it takes is just somebody saying, I wonder what that would look like. And it might look like something completely different in any other church community. But just to ask the question together of what can we do? What might we do if we did it together? One of the evils of our system, I think, is this insistence that we're all in it alone. You know, we look at our clients as financial advisors, and everybody is saving for the worst possible scenario. And it's only going to materialize for maybe 1 out of 5. But we're all saving as if we feel like we have to do that because there's nobody else to count on but ourselves. And so until, you know, in my reading of Scripture, what a biblical economy would look like is a situation where we would be taking better care of each other. So you can pool those resources, and then if you're the 1 in 5, you have access to it, but we're not all saving for the worst case. We are a really long way from there. But my hope, as I wrote, my hope and prayer is that if we do our piece of the work now, that our children's children's children might get to live somewhere closer to that.
Do you have time to maybe speak a little bit about chapter 5?
Is that the one on planning? Yeah. Giving. What do you want to hear about it?
It's my favorite subject. So.
Giving. John Wesley already said it all. I guess the thing that I would say about giving is it's a system of redistribution. And I think we are called to redistribution. The biblical story has jubilee, fallow years where other people can glean your fields. There are reset mechanisms. So when inequality, which has always happened in every system and every time, that there's this tendency for some people to accumulate more and others to have less. So there are in the biblical stories reset mechanisms to bring that back closer together. We just don't have any of those reset mechanisms anymore. Some countries have very high tax rates as kind of a reset, to balance out that tendency as a form of redistribution. Well, we're sure not going there in the U.S., and that leaves giving. So it's, as I call it, God's circulatory system. It's God's money circulatory system, and it is incumbent upon us to participate in that. In whatever way we can. It doesn't have to be money. There are other ways. My pastor does it so beautifully on some Sundays of honoring the time and commitments and the love and caring and all the ways that we give and build the community. All of that is related to these money questions. I hope you've heard that my emphasis on the building and strengthening the community and all of those time gifts. So it doesn't have to be money, thank goodness, because most of us have times in our lives when we don't have money to give, but we do have other things. And then the other thing I'd like to say about giving is I think sometimes we feel like or at least I grew up feeling like the story was you give for other people to help them. And I think the biblical story is more that we give to help us. The disease that people tend to have, again, it's in the Bible, so it's been going on for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. That disease of clutching to the money, of being fearful and clinging and to the money, loses some of its power when we give. Unfortunately, I think it was easier if you grow up in a church a church who teaches tithing, then you don't have to make that decision every week. You just do it. You know, it becomes a habit. It's a life habit. It's so interesting to see people flow in and out of our church. For over a decade, I was the person who put the contributions in the computer. So I saw who gave and who didn't. And you could see people's lives get difficult, or a kid go to college or whatever, and how their money flowed. It was fascinating. And then the kid gets through college and their giving goes back up. And, you know, so people gave as they can, but it was it's just such a mercy to be able to let go, to learn to let go. And I think that's the piece of the giving story that we forget. And it takes something away from people, I think, to not emphasize that it's really, like so many things, it's all about me. But it is about part of our spiritual growth around this, to just be able to let some things flow. She's coming.
I heard you say that you have a 21-year-old
And a 23-year-old.
23-year-old. So because you've done so much work around money, what was your message to your children as they were growing up about money? What did you tell them?
Here's the sick, sorry story there. When our daughter was 4, I was working as an economist then. We were in Charlotte, North Carolina. My husband was already doing the financial planning practice. He got sick with pneumonia and was in bed for like 3 weeks. Not a good thing to happen when you're building a business, but hey. So this little 4-year-old, we didn't have smartphones and stuff then. You just had a TV down the hall. She would run down the hall and look at the CNBC report and run back and say, "Up 3.6, Daddy." Down 400 or down 400 or what it was. And it was really cute and funny. She had no idea what she was saying, but I thought, this is really sick. We've got to do something different here. She's not twisted, just to say. At least not because of that. Our money messages were things like, I remember when she was maybe 10 or 12, and we'd had a church meeting over at the house. And after everybody left, she looked at me, she said, "You realize we have the, what's the word she used, like shabbiest car of anybody out there, right?" And I said, "Yeah, but honey, ours is paid for." And I wanted her to know early that things are not always as they look. And, our house was half the size of other people's, and they learned who to play with. Our one kid, we have a 1,400 square foot house, which for 4 people we did just fine, thank you very much, but it was significantly smaller than some of their friends. And the kid was just ridiculing my son's bedroom for being so small. And I didn't have to say anything about that. That was just the end of that little friendship. And my son took care of it. My proudest money moment, and I've actually written about this for publication, was driving past a big box store that promotes ever lower prices one day. And I was just thinking about traffic. I was not thinking teaching money, right? And my daughter looks at the sign as we're passing the store, and she says, "Cheaper for whom?" And I didn't even know that she had grasped that when we are perpetually pushing for lower prices, that's on somebody's back. That's on somebody's back. Do I really need yet another shirt? And, I have to have another one, so it's got to be cheap so I can have more of them. Well, do I really need more? And and sometimes the answer is yes. But the point is to ask the question and to really evaluate and to, in our heart of hearts, know what's true. To not lie to ourselves about that. We tried really hard to be honest with our kids. I'd hear myself, can I have this at the store? Oh, we can't afford that. And I realized that's just not true. We could afford that, but I'm not paying for it. It's okay. We tried to teach them just because you can have it doesn't mean you should have it or that you have to have it. Just because you can go on fancy trips over spring break doesn't mean we have to do it. And you are not less than your friends that did. So we work, those are the kinds of things that we worked on, but they picked up much more than I ever tried. Now, then my daughter will tell you now, she's recently written a piece for the Faith and Money Network new study guide that's coming out soon, and she has quite a critique about the things I didn't do well. But I'm not ratting myself out, so you'll just have to read that. She feels like we didn't prepare her very well for some of the realities of young adulthood about how much things cost. But she's she's wired tight like I am, and she's kind of a high-stress kid. And I thought, I couldn't figure out where the balance was between being straightforward about all that and increasing her stress so much that she couldn't function. I just didn't know where that line was. And apparently I didn't evaluate it well. I thought about it, I worked at it, but I never quite knew what to do with that. It's hard with kids in this world. And my experience is so different. We had this discussion. My husband's even older than I am with these kids, and he's like, well, they should be able to put themselves through college, serving the cafeteria line. That's what I did. And I'm like, okay, sweetie, let's do the math on that.
Right.
And so we just divided up tuition by 7.25 or whatever the minimum wage was going to be for them. And they'd have to work, about 72 hours a week at that rate to pay current tuition rates. And I don't remember what the literal number was, but it was not something that anybody could pull off. And that was really an eye-opener to realize just how much things have changed for them. And I'm just not going to be able to help at a certain point. Just all I can do is pray that I've given them a good enough grounding that they can take it from here. Because they're going to be taking care of me in my old age. I'm modeling that too. My mom's 17 years into the dementia adventure, and so we're modeling that one too. Here's what happens when I lose my mind. And they're so different. Oh my gosh. She cannot hold on to $1. Cannot. And he doesn't spend $1. Yep. Has every dollar he's ever touched, just about. It's amazing. They're 2 years apart. We thought we were raising them pretty much the same. How does that happen? It's really partly our personalities and all those things. I really encourage you to write. Did you read the section on the money autobiography? I cannot recommend strongly enough that you engage with that. One question at a time if you have to, however you spread it out. But it's just so enlightening to see some of the money messages you got from your family, those that are good and you want to keep, and some that you think, oh, I need to let that one go. And to clarify really where some of our feelings come from, some of the things that we have attached to, and it's just a really useful tool for clarity and compassion, I say, along with that, because when we see how conflicted and complicated and all our histories and experiences are and how all that plays together, then we just can't judge anybody else anymore, because their story is their story and it's different from yours, and we just don't have any way to know how that's played out for them. They may be doing really great given where they came from, or we may realize that we haven't come very far and we still got some work to do. You know, it's just, so it's a tool for compassion as well, I think, to make sure we're not, it's easy to judge about money because I think our world I feel judged. So, you know, kind of position myself and where am I and rankings and that competitive thing. And it's not helpful. It's not helpful. And I just don't think it's faithful. I just don't. You know, the stories and what we know of the workers who worked an hour and got paid the same as the workers who worked all day. And I don't know how literal that is, and it doesn't really matter to me, but the message is that we all matter. We all matter, we all contribute. And so our value, and certainly God's love for us, cannot be pinned there. And that's the good news. That's the good news. Grace upon grace.
Amen. Amen. Well, it sounds like that's a good place for us to pause. And I'm sure that as we are here for the rest of Mission U and our time together, we'll really be chewing on this word for a while. This has been, let's just give her a round of applause. Send her some love, you know.
An invitation I'd like to leave you with is, you can just Google Just Money Advisors and you'll find my email address. I love to talk about this stuff, so just feel free to call or email. If something comes up as you're preparing for the study and something doesn't make sense or it doesn't ring true or something, feel free to get in touch, and I'll try not to talk your ear off.